Greetings, loved ones. While physical injuries may or may not be immediately visible, abuse and neglect can have consequences for children, families, and society that last lifetimes, if not generations. The impact of child abuse and neglect is often discussed in terms of physical, psychological, behavioral, and societal consequences. However, it is impossible to separate the types of impacts. Today we are in part 2 of long-term consequences of child abuse, and we'll discuss behavioral and social consequences. Help us get these messages out. Please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and the notification bell, and please share these messages with others because you could save a life. Let's talk about behavioral consequences. Not all victims of child abuse and neglect will experience behavioral consequences. However, behavioral problems appear to be more likely among this group. More than half of youth reported for maltreatment are at risk for an emotional or behavioral problem. Child abuse and neglect appear to make the following situations more likely. Number 1, difficulties during adolescence. Data shows that more than half of youth with reports of maltreatment are at risk of grade repetition, substance abuse, delinquency, truancy, or pregnancy. Studies suggest that abused or neglected children are more likely to engage in several risk-taking events as they reach adolescence, thereby increasing their chances of contracting a sexually transmitted disease. Victims of child sexual abuse also are at a higher risk for rape in adulthood, and the rate of risk increases according to the severity of the child abuse experiences. Number 2, juvenile delinquency and adult criminality. Several studies have documented the correlation between child abuse and future juvenile delinquency. Children who have experienced abuse are 9 times more likely to become involved in criminal activities. Number 3, alcohol and other drug abuse. Research consistently reflects an increased likelihood that children who have experienced abuse or neglect will smoke cigarettes, abuse alcohol, or take illicit drugs in their lifetime. In fact, male children having 6 or more adverse child experiences had increased likelihood of more than 4,000% to use intravenous drugs later in life. And a fourth activity that indicates abuse in children is abusive behaviors. Abusive parents often have experienced abuse during their own childhoods. Data from the longitudinal study of adolescent health showed that girls who experience childhood physical abuse are 1 to 7% more likely to become perpetrators of youth violence and 8 to 10% more likely to be perpetrators of interpersonal violence. Boys who experience childhood sexual violence were 3 to 12% more likely to commit youth violence and 1 to 17% more likely to commit interpersonal violence. And there are many societal consequences too. While child abuse and neglect usually occurs within the family, the impact does not end there. Society pays a price for child abuse and neglect in terms of both direct and indirect costs. So let's look at these. If we're looking at direct costs, the lifetime cost of child maltreatment and related fatalities during a year totals $124 billion, according to a study funded by the CDC. Child abuse is more costly on an annual basis than the 2 leading health concerns of stroke and type 2 diabetes. On the other hand, programs that prevent abuse have shown to be cost effective. So now let's look at indirect costs. Indirect costs represent the long-term economic consequences to society because of child abuse and neglect. These include costs associated with increased use of our healthcare system, juvenile and adult criminal activity, mental illness, substance abuse, and more domestic violence. Prevent Child Abuse America estimates that child abuse and neglect prevention strategies can save taxpayers $104 billion each year. According to the Schuler Center for Analysis and Advocacy, every $1 spent on home visiting yields a $5.70 return on investment in New York, including reduced confirmed reports of abuse, reduced family enrollment in temporary assistance for needy families, decreased visits to emergency rooms, decreased arrest rates for mothers, and increased monthly earnings. One study found that all 8 categories of adverse childhood experiences were associated with an increased likelihood of employment problems, financial problems, and absenteeism. These long-term costs to the workforce and to society are all preventable. So what can we do? Prevention practice and strategies to break this cycle of abuse and reduce the likelihood of long-term consequences. Communities all over the place must continue to develop and implement strategies that prevent abuse or neglect from happening in the first place. While experts agree that the causes of child abuse and neglect are complex, it is possible to develop prevention initiatives that address known risk factors. Let's talk about trauma-informed practice. While the priority is to prevent child abuse and neglect from occurring, it is equally important to respond to those children and adults who have experienced abuse and neglect. Over the past 30 years, researchers and practitioners have developed a better understanding of the effects of trauma. More has been done in the way of developing supports to address these effects, build resiliency, and hopefully prevent further trauma. Trauma-informed practice refers to the services and programs specifically designed to address and respond to the impact of traumatic stress. The importance of this approach has become especially evident in the child welfare system, as most children and families involved with child welfare have experienced some form of past trauma. When human services systems recognize and respond to the impact of trauma and use this knowledge to adapt policies and practices, children, youth, and families benefit. In summary, there is a significant body of ongoing research on the consequences of child abuse and neglect. The effects vary depending on the circumstance of the abuse or neglect, personal characteristics of the child, and the child's environment. Consequences may be mild or severe, disappear after a short period, or last a lifetime, and they can affect the child physically, psychologically, behaviorally, or in some combination of all 3 ways. Ultimately, due to related costs to public entities such as the healthcare, human services, and educational systems, abuse and neglect impact not just the child and the family, but society as a whole. Therefore, it is imperative for communities to provide a framework of prevention strategies and services before abuse and neglect occur, and to be prepared to offer remediation and treatment when necessary. According to the CDC, over half of all the children in the world, that is 1 billion children ages 2 to 17 years, experience violence every year. The question is not if you'll encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be the person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions for justice, and those who suffer violence need to know that those who love them and those who don't even know them will reach out to them and give them the help and the courage they need to leave before it's too late. Help us get these messages out. Subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and share these messages with others. You could save a life. If you are a victim of violence, please listen to me. I want you to know that you are valued, you are loved, you're intelligent, and you are worthy. God does not want you to suffer violence. He wants you to live free from violence in peace and tranquility. There is a way out, and it is not your fault. Abuse is not love. You are not alone. And if you're a victim of violence, reach out to somebody today. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, call 911 for help. If you know of somebody suffering violence, tell the authorities. In our next episode, we're going to continue in part 3 of long-term consequences of child abuse. Until then, God bless you.